Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to learn about another optimization hook called useMemo. The way that useMemo works is that it allows us to memoize the return value of a function, very similar to the way that we have already become familiar with inside of reselect. The only thing is that we are not passing parameters all the time inside of our functions in React. A lot of our functional components rely on outside variables, such as variables defined by the state or defined by the scope and the props. So as a result, useMemo is a little different. I have here created a function that makes it very easy for us to extend the time it takes for something to finish. So what I can quickly do is create some function, and all it does is it just console.logs the start, and it console.logs the end. But what it does is it inside will delay for 2 seconds. On top of that, what I also want to do is I want to set some value count. And I'm going to use a useState value here simply to do so. So here, instead of our goToCheckout handler, this is just going to be some function that sets the count value equal to the current count value plus 1. What I want to do from this function is I want to return 100 plus the count. So essentially, when this function fires, what it's going to do, it's going to log start, it's going to wait 2 seconds, it's going to log the end, and then inside of this func value is going to be restored 100 count. So we can actually even call it, let's call it 100 count, just to be even more explicit, or 100 count. I don't know if React doesn't like us using numbers inside of our variables. And here I'm just going to say that some const val is equal to us running 100 count every time this component re-renders. So again, this is a very computationally expensive function just to give us 100 plus the current count value. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment out all of our cart items and just simply render the value here. So if I save this, and if I go back to my application, and let's just refresh. So here, inside of our application, if I were to click Go to Checkout, what happens, count increases by 1, and we see the start, there's a delay, and then end, and then we finally see this number update. So what we're seeing is that there is a lot of delay because this is a computationally expensive calculation. But the problem with this is that if I add to cart, the component will re-render, count will not need to update, but in spite of that, as we know with our functions, there is a very expensive calculation that happens before finally the end starts and we saw this application unfreeze. Notice that when I click add to cart here, even though I've hovered off, we're still in a hover state inside our product cart because the application is frozen due to our delay. So despite the fact that our count value is not updating, our really expensive function is getting recalculated every time. Now, what useMemo does is it memoizes the value inside of this hook. So when we pass it this function callback, what will happen is that 100 count will initialize, useMemo will calculate the value inside of this function, and then it will memoize that value somewhere. So anytime you reference it, it will now be using that memoized value, unless whatever dependency you pass inside this dependency array changes. So now, let's say I added the 100 count. I'm not going to add the dependency array yet, but here if I save now, I come back to the application and I refresh. Let's see what happens. So on mount, of course, as I mentioned, start needs to actually run, end runs after the delay, so nothing has changed about the delay. But at the very least, now we have our value. But if I were to add these values, notice how it's not re-rendering our cart. We're also not stuck inside of that delay. So this is essentially what happens. Every time the component is re-rendering, React is going into that useMemo hook, and whenever it sees that line right here on line 30, and it knows, hey, I've already calculated this value before. I'm just going to give you back whatever you get back from this value. And now I'm always going to get back that initial value. The problem, of course, as we can see, is that even though we're increasing the count, this number is not changing. So this is where you want to add in the dependency array for useMemo any of the variables that you want to track, so that essentially whenever that variable changes, React will recalculate the output of this very expensive function and then cache that value. So now if we go back to our application, we see our initialization is slow. We have our 100. We hit go checkout, again, delay, and then the end, and then finally the value updates. But at the very least, it does not block whenever this component re-renders. The only time it's blocking and it needs to recompute our expensive function is when the actual dependency array values change. And that's it. This is how useMemo works. It's primarily for when you have expensive functions that need to recompute, and they depend on these values inside of your functional component. If you want to memorize those values and make sure that they don't get interrupted or they don't get rerun unnecessarily during a re-render cycle, then you use the useMemo hook. So that's the difference between useMemo and useCallback. UseCallback memoizes the function itself. useMemo memoizes the return value of the function. So now we understand useMemo and useCallback.